chapter 10, looking at Christian societies emerging in Europe, kind of development of Christianity, that kind of thing. This is the instructional objectives. All right, so let's begin. We're first going to be looking at the Byzantine Empire from 600 to 1200. We're going to be looking at the empire beleaguered first. Following the Sassanids, the Muslim Arabs took wealthy provinces in Syria, Egypt, Tunisia from the Byzantine Empire and converted their people to Islam. These losses permanently reduced the power of the Byzantine Empire. On the religious and political fronts, the Byzantine Empire experienced declining relations with the popes and princes of Western Europe, and the formal schism between the Latin and Orthodox churches in 1054. The Byzantine Empire experienced a decline in urbanism, similar to that seen in the West, but it was not as severe. One result was the loss of the middle class, so that the Byzantine society was characterized by a tremendous gap between wealth and aristocrats and the poverty of the peasants. In the Byzantine period, family became more rigid. Women were confined to their houses and wore veils if they went out. However, Byzantine women ruled alongside their husbands between 1028 and 1056, and women did not take refuge in nunneries. The Byzantine emperors intervened in the economy by setting prices, controlling the provision of grain to the capital, and monopolizing trade on certain goods. As a result, Constantinople was well supplied, but the cities and rural areas of the rest of the empire lagged behind in wealth, in terms of wealth and technology. Gradually, the Western Europeans began to view the Byzantine Empire as a crumbling power. For their part, the Byzantines thought that the Westerners were basically uncouth barbarians. Then you had some cultural achievements. Legal scholars put together a collection of Roman laws and edicts under the title of known as the Body of Civil Law. Make sure you understand that Body of Civil Law. The compilation of these became the basis of Western European civil law. Byzantine architects developed the technique of making domed buildings. The Italian Renaissance architects adopted the dome in the 15th and 16th centuries. In the 9th century, the Byzantine missionaries Cyril and Methodius preached to the Slavs of Moravia, and taught their followers to write in the Cyrillic script. So let's talk about early medieval society, really this time of insecurity. So Christianity by this point had been growing, had developed over time. And you really, in the Roman Empire, that's where you see kind of it get its start, with Jesus being crucified. To the Romans, what's interesting is that Jesus really, like, he was just a name on there. It wasn't a big deal. But to Christianity, Christians, followers of Jesus, obviously, it was really what launched the religion, because he became kind of that martyr for Christianity. In the 5th century, the Roman Empire broke down. Europe was politically fragmented, with these many Germanic kings ruling a number of dissimilar kingdoms. Western Europe continued to suffer invasions from Muslim Arabs, and Berbers took the Iberian Peninsula and pushed into France. In the 8th century, the Carolingians united various Frankish kingdoms into a larger empire. At its height under Charlemagne, the empire included Gaul and parts of Germany and Italy. The empire was subdivided by Charlemagne's grandsons and was never united again. Vikings attacked England, France, and Spain in the late 8th and 9th centuries. Vikings also settled in Iceland and Normandy, from which the Norman William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066. It has kind of come up with this self-sufficient economy. The fall of the Roman Empire was accompanied by an economic transformation that included the de-urbanization and decline in world trade. Without the domination of Rome and its great tradition, regional elites became more self-sufficient than local small traditions flourished. The medieval diet in the north was based on beer, lard, or butter, as well as bread. In the south, the staples were wheat, wine, and olive oil. Self-sufficient farming estates called manors were the primary centers of agricultural production. Manors grew from the need for self-sufficiency and self-defense. The lord of the manor had almost unlimited power over his agricultural workers, known as the serfs. The condition of the agricultural workers varied because of the tradition of free peasantry survived in some areas. Early medieval society in the West. During the early medieval period, a class of nobles emerged and developed into mounted knights. Landowning and military service became almost inseparable. The complex network of relationships between landowning and the obligation to provide military service to the lord is often referred to as feudalism. Should be a term that you understand already. The need for military security led to the new military technology, including the stirrup, bigger horses, the armor, and weapons of the knight. The equipment was expensive, and the knights therefore needed land to support themselves. Kings and nobles granted land, a fief, to a man in return for his promise to supply military service. By the 10th century, these fiefs, or fiefs, however you want to pronounce it, had become hereditary. Kings were weak because they depended on their vassals, who might very well hold fiefs from and obliged to more than one lord. Vassals held most of their king's realm, and most of the vassals granted substantial parts of their land to their vassals. So it kind of keeps going. It's very confusing. Kings and nobles had unlimited ability to administer the tax their realms. Their power was further limited by their inability to tax the vast land ownings of the church. For most medieval people, the lord's manor was the government. Noble women were pawn in marriage politics. Women could own land, however, non-noble women worked alongside men. This shows you kind of the extent of Christianity over time. As you see, it's in mostly in Egypt. You also see it kind of expand in a lot of areas that were traditionally Muslim as well. These were the Germanic kingdoms. So these are known. We think of Germanic or Germany, and we think of the one place Germany. These are actually known as Germanic kingdoms. They were the kingdoms that were all throughout Europe over time. These kingdoms, the king of them didn't really have a lot of power. All right, so let's talk about politics in the church. The Pope sought to combine the religious power with political power by forging alliances with kings, and finally by choosing in 962 to crown a German king as the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Empire was in fact no more than a loose coalition of German princes. Even with the Holy Roman Empire, secular rulers argued that they should have the power to appoint bishops who held land in fief. Popes disagreed, which led to a conflict known as the investiture controversy. Controversy, which is right there, or crisis. This issue was resolved through the Compromise of 1122. In England, conflict between secular power and the power of the church broke out when Henry II tried to bring the church under his control as part of the general effort to strengthen his power the regional by bringing in the regional nobility. Western Europe was the heir to three legal traditions: Germanic feudal law, canon or church law, and Roman law. The presence of conflicting legal theories in the legal jurisdictions was a significant characteristic of Western Europe. Now we move to monasticism. Christian monasticism developed in Egypt in the 4th century on the basis of previous religious practices such as celibacy, devotion to prayer, and isolation from society. In Western Europe, Benedict of Nursia, which basically lived from 480 to 547, organized monasteries and supplied them with a set of written rules that governed all aspects of ritual and everyday life. These men and women left society to devote themselves to a monastic life. Monasteries served a number of functions. They were centers of literacy and learning and refuge for widows and other vulnerable women. They also functioned as inns and orphanages and managed their own estates and agricultural land. It was difficult for the Catholic hierarchy to exercise oversight over the monasteries. In the 11th century, a reform movement developed within the monastic establishment when the Abbey of Cluny worked to improve the administration and discipline of monasteries. So now we're going to move into Kievan Russia. Russia includes territory of the Black and Caspian Seas in the south to the Baltic and White Seas in the north. The territory includes a series of ecological zones running from east to west and crossed by several navigable rivers. In its early history, Russia was inhabited by a number of peoples of different language and ethnic groups whose territory shifted from century to century. What emerged was a general pattern of Slavs in the east, Finns in the north, and Turkic tribes in the south. Forest dwellers, steppe nomads, and farmers in the various ecological zones traded with each other. Long-distance caravan trade linked Russia to the Silk Road, and the Varangians, or the relatives of the Vikings, were active traders on the rivers, and the Khazar Turks built a trading kingdom in the mouth of the Volga. The Rus were societies of Western Slav farmers ruled by the Varangian nobles. The most important cities were Kiev and Novgorod, both centers of trade. In 980, Vladimir I became Grand Prince of Kiev. He chose Orthodox Christianity as the religion of his state and imitated the culture of the Byzantine Empire, building churches, adopting the Cyrillic alphabet, and orientating his trade towards the Byzantines. Internal political struggles and conflict with external foes led to the decline of Kievan Russia after 1100. Then you move to society and culture. Kievan Russia had poor agricultural land, a short growing season, and primitive farming technology. Food production was low, and the political power of the Kievan state relied more on trade than it did on landholding. The major cities of Kiev and Novgorod had populations of 30,000 to 50,000, which were much smaller than Constantinople or other large Muslim cities. Kiev and Novgorod and other much smaller urban areas were centers of craftspeople, artisans, whose social status was higher than that of the peasants. Christianity spread slowly in the Kievan state. Pagan customs and polygamy persisted until the late 12th century. In the 12th century, Christianity triumphed and the church became more powerful, with some clergy functioning as tax collectors for the state. All right, so let's look at the role of technology. Western Europe's population and agricultural production increased in the period of 1000 to 1200, feeding a resurgence of trade and enabling kings to strengthen their control. Historians attribute the revival to new technologies and the appearance of self-governing cities. Historians agree that technology played a significant role in European population growth from 1000 to 1200. Among the technological innovations associated with this population growth are the heavy moldboard plow, the horse collar, and the breast strap harness. Historians are not sure whether the horse collar and breast strap harness were disseminated to Europe from Central Asia or from Tunisia or Libya, nor is it precisely clear when or why European farmers began using teams of horses rather than the slower, weaker oxen to plow the heavy soils of Northern Europe. And you have cities in the rebirth of trade. Independent self-governing cities first in Italy and Flanders, emerged first in Italy and Flanders. They relied on manufacturing and trade for their income, and they had legal independence so that their laws could favor manufacturing and trade. In Italy, Venice emerged as the dominant sea power, trading in Muslim ports for spices and other goods. In Flanders, cities like Ghent imported wool from England and wove it into cloth for export. The recovery of trade was accompanied by the increase in the use of high-value gold and silver coins, which had rarely been used in early medieval Europe. During the mid-12th century, Europeans began minting first silver, then gold coins. So then let's talk about the Crusades for a little bit. The Crusades were a series of Christian military campaigns against Muslims in the eastern Mediterranean between 1100 and 1200. Factors causing the Crusades included religious zeal, knights' willingness to engage in church-sanctioned warfare, a desire for land on the part of younger sons of the European nobility, and an interest in trade. The tradition of pilgrimages, Muslim control of Christian religious sites and the Byzantine Empire's request for help against Muslims combined to make the Holy Land the focus of the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II initiated the First Crusade when he called upon Europeans to stop fighting each other and fight Muslims instead. The Crusades had a limited impact on the Muslim world. More significant was that the Crusades ended Europe's intellectual isolation when Arabic and Greek manuscripts gave Europeans their first access to work of the ancient Greek philosophers. The Crusades had a significant impact on the lifestyle of urban elites. And so then this is where you have your comparing perspectives again. Political and economic distinctions between Western Europe and the Byzantium. Basically, this is where you see kind of some similarities with religion, focus on military techniques, that kind of thing. And then that is where we will stop. I didn't really get into the origins of Christianity. It mostly revolves around Jesus spreading, having visions, and kind of his life, as you guys hopefully know a little bit with being born on Christmas Eve and that kind of thing, and then saying that focus less on what the Roman basically empire has to say and focus on being good and praying and things like that. And this was really his ideas were really popular among the impoverished, which were there were a lot of at the time. And so after he's crucified by the Romans, his apostles, such as people like Paul, went around spreading the word, and that's how Christianity started and grew. If you have questions about that part specifically, let's talk. Guys, if you need anything,